It was an ordinary day for the passengers aboard Flight 476, a luxury flight with elegant interiors and a calm, peaceful atmosphere. The soft hum of the plane's engines filled the air, and the flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, offering drinks and snacks. The passengers, all settled into their comfortable seats, seemed relaxed, enjoying their peaceful journey. The kind of flight where everything appeared to go according to plan, until one unexpected moment that would change everything. In the middle of the business class cabin, a black woman sat confidently in her seat. She was dressed in a sharp, well-tailored suit, a reflection of her professional demeanor. Her posture was upright, her expression calm, and she exuded an air of confidence that immediately set her apart. She gazed out of the window for a moment, as if lost in thought, and then casually flipped through the pages of a book she'd been reading. To the other passengers, she seemed like any other traveler, a successful businesswoman, maybe on her way to a meeting or a conference. No one could guess that beneath the calm exterior, she was not just a regular passenger, but someone with authority far beyond what they could imagine. At the front of the cabin, the pilot made her way down the aisle. She was in uniform, walking with purpose and authority. It was clear that she had an air of confidence about her, as most pilots did. But as she passed by the rows of seats, her eyes fell on the woman in the business class seat. She paused for a moment, a look of confusion crossing her face. The black woman's seat seemed to be in an area designated for someone else, or at least that's what the pilot assumed. It was common for airlines to have specific seating arrangements, especially in the premium cabins, and this woman's seat seemed out of place. Without thinking, the pilot stopped beside the woman, her face tight with irritation. She spoke in a stern, no-nonsense tone. "Excuse me, but this seat is for someone else. You need to move." The black woman looked up from her book, her expression unchanging. She had expected a situation like this. Calmly, she glanced at the pilot, but instead of reacting with anger or frustration, she simply replied, "I'm fine here." The pilot's irritation grew. She had a job to do, and she was determined to assert her authority. "I don't think you understand," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You need to get up. This seat is not for you." Passengers nearby began to shift in their seats, sensing the rising tension. Some glanced at each other nervously, while others turned their attention back to their own activities, unsure whether they should intervene or simply mind their own business. But no one could ignore the subtle power struggle unfolding between the two women. The black woman didn't flinch. She kept her cool, though it was clear that the pilot's attitude was beginning to grate on her. There was something about the way the pilot was speaking, like she didn't see her as an equal, like she didn't belong in a seat like this. She could feel the weight of assumptions hanging in the air, the sense that the pilot believed she was somehow out of place, simply because of her appearance. The woman, however, refused to be intimidated. She had encountered such attitudes before, but she wasn't about to let them affect her. "Please, I'm perfectly fine in this seat," the black woman replied, her voice calm but firm. Her words, though polite, carried an undeniable strength. She wasn't going to let this moment slip away quietly. She was not someone to be dismissed. The pilot's face flushed with growing frustration. She wasn't used to having her authority questioned, especially not by someone she assumed to be just another passenger. The tension in the cabin was palpable, and the air seemed to thicken with every passing second. "I'm asking you one last time," the pilot said, her voice now colder, more demanding. "Get up, or I'll call the cops." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. The passengers around them fell silent, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. It was as if time itself had stopped, and all eyes were on the woman in the seat and the pilot standing before her. The woman could feel the gazes of the other passengers, their judgment already being passed. Some were shocked, others looked uncomfortable, but no one said a word. The black woman took a deep breath, not out of fear, but out of the quiet strength she carried within. She knew this moment wasn't about just this seat. It was about something much bigger, something deeper. and she wasn't about to let this pilot, or anyone, tell her she didn't belong. As the pilot stood there, waiting for the woman to stand up, the tension seemed to reach its peak. The moment felt like it would break in an instant, but the black woman was calm. Her eyes never left the pilot's, her face neutral but resolute. She knew exactly what she was about to say, but she wasn't going to say it until the time was right. And then, in the thick silence of the cabin, the black woman spoke the words that would change everything. The silence in the cabin stretched on, and for a few seconds, it felt like time had frozen. The pilot's command hung in the air, cold and unforgiving. The black woman sat motionless, her gaze steady, unwavering. Every passenger around her seemed to be holding their breath, watching as the confrontation escalated. The tension was thick, palpable, as if the slightest movement could trigger an explosion of words or actions. But the black woman didn't move a muscle. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the mounting pressure in the air. The pilot's patience, however, was wearing thin. She stood there, waiting for the woman to comply. She was used to commanding authority, used to people listening to her. And this passenger was no different. At least, that's what she thought. But the calm resistance in the woman's demeanor was starting to unnerve her. There was something about her that didn't seem right, as though she was untouchable in some way. The pilot's eyes narrowed, her mind racing as she searched for the right words to maintain control of the situation. "You need to get out of that seat," the pilot snapped, her voice now laced with impatience. "I'll have to call security if you don't move right now." She was trying to sound firm, but there was a hint of doubt creeping into her voice. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. The black woman was not backing down, and the pilot was unsure how to handle it. The woman's face remained stoic. She didn't appear nervous, didn't flinch, didn't even seem to acknowledge the pilot's rising anger. The moment stretched on, but still, no one in the cabin spoke up. The passengers were caught in an uncomfortable limbo, unsure of how to react or if they should intervene. They watched as this exchange unfolded before them. Some looking away, some staring at the confrontation, but no one daring to break the silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the black woman spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was a quiet strength behind it that immediately grabbed the pilot's attention. "I'm not going anywhere," she said simply, her words clear and confident. "I'm the chief of police." The effect of those words was immediate and explosive. The pilot's face flushed with confusion, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process what had just been said. The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. The black woman's declaration wasn't one of arrogance, but of fact. And in that moment, everything changed. The pilot's expression morphed from one of angry authority to one of surprise and disbelief. It was as if the world had shifted under her feet. The cabin, which had been so silent just moments ago, now seemed alive with whispers. The passengers who had been silently watching the scene unfold now exchanged nervous glances, some even leaning forward in their seats to get a better view. There was an unspoken understanding among them that something important had just happened, something that could have serious consequences for the pilot. The woman's words echoed in the cabin, reverberating through the tense air. "I am the chief of police," she repeated, her voice unwavering. The calmness in her tone was striking. It wasn't a boast, nor was it meant to intimidate. It was simply the truth, and it was enough to stop the pilot dead in her tracks. She had made a grave mistake. The woman wasn't just some ordinary passenger. She was someone with power, authority, and the ability to handle this situation far better than anyone else on the plane. The pilot blinked, trying to process what had just happened. She had misjudged the situation completely. The woman in front of her, who she had thought was just another regular passenger, was in fact someone who could hold the very power to influence the outcome of this moment. The pilot stammered. The words stuck in her throat, unable to reconcile the image of the stern woman in front of her with the sudden revelation of her true identity. For a brief moment, the tension in the air seemed to pause. The passengers who had been watching anxiously now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The pilot's authority, once so firm, had been shattered in an instant. She had assumed the woman was beneath her, just another traveler, easy to boss around. But the truth was clear now. The woman was not only her equal, she was someone who could command respect without uttering another word. The reality of the situation was dawning on the pilot, and the weight of her mistake was heavy. The black woman, though, remained calm, unaffected by the sudden shift in the dynamic. She wasn't here to make a scene, but rather to make sure that respect was upheld in the air, just as it was on the ground. The pilot, now realizing the gravity of her error, could only stand there, processing the revelation and waiting for what would happen next. In that moment, the roles had completely reversed. The woman, once just a regular passenger in the eyes of the pilot, was now in full control of the situation. And as she stood there, unwavering and confident, the pilot's once confident facade crumbled. The atmosphere inside the cabin was thick with tension. The moment the black woman had uttered those simple words, "I'm the chief of police," everything changed. The pilot, who had once stood tall, authoritative, and confident, was now left reeling from the realization of her mistake. It was as though the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted, and the air around her had grown heavy, pressing down with the weight of her error. The passengers, once indifferent to the unfolding drama, now watched with rapt attention, sensing that something profound was happening. The pilot took a step back, her mind scrambling to process the information. She was not used to being in this position, where she felt so vulnerable, so exposed. Her posture faltered as she struggled to regain her composure. Her grip on the situation was slipping, and she could feel the eyes of every passenger on her, silently judging her. The black woman, however, stood there calmly, her expression unchanging, giving nothing away. It was as if she knew exactly what was happening, as if she had anticipated this moment long before the confrontation had even begun. The pilot's mouth moved, but no words came out at first. She blinked several times, unsure of how to proceed. The cold, authoritative tone she had been using earlier now sounded weak and uncertain. The confidence that had filled her earlier had evaporated. Her hand trembled slightly, betraying her inner turmoil as she realized that she had just escalated a situation that could have easily been avoided. I'm sorry," the pilot stammered, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and the apology seemed hollow, almost useless in the face of the woman's calm strength. The black woman had not moved, but her presence was a force to be reckoned with. She stood there with the quiet dignity of someone who had been through far worse than this. She was a woman who had earned her position through hard work, respect, and integrity. And now, in front of the entire cabin, she was showing the pilot that respect must be given to everyone, regardless of appearance, background, or assumptions. The pilot's regret became evident as the seconds ticked by. She could feel the gaze of the other passengers on her, some shaking their heads in disappointment, others simply watching with wide eyes. The whispers had started, soft murmurs that grew louder as people began to share their thoughts on the situation. The pilot could hear fragments of their conversations, and it only deepened her sense of shame. "She's the chief of police," one passenger whispered. "Can't believe the pilot didn't know," another muttered. It was clear now. The pilot's mistake had gone beyond a simple misunderstanding. She had let her biases, her assumptions about the black woman, cloud her judgment. She had assumed that someone like her didn't belong in the luxurious business-class seat, that she was just another passenger to be bossed around. But she was wrong. So wrong. The black woman finally broke the silence, her voice cutting through the air with quiet authority. "It's important to treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are or what they look like," she said, her tone firm yet measured. "I'm not here to cause trouble, but I will not let anyone treat me like I'm invisible." The pilot stood frozen, her head now bowed in embarrassment. Her mind raced as she realized the full weight of what she had done. This was not just about a seat on an airplane anymore. This was about something much bigger, about the way she had treated a person, about how quickly she had assumed she was in the right simply because of her uniform. She had underestimated the woman in front of her, and now she had to face the consequences of that arrogance. The passengers around them had begun to shift uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or to stay silent. But as the black woman spoke, they all seemed to share a collective understanding. It wasn't just about the pilot's apology. It was about the lesson everyone in the cabin was now learning. The pilot had made an assumption based on the woman's appearance, and that assumption had cost her dearly. The woman wasn't just a passenger. She was a leader, someone who commanded respect. And she had shown the pilot that respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned. The pilot, now visibly flustered, took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her hands shook slightly, and she felt her face redden with the shame of realizing the gravity of her mistake. She wanted to apologize again, to make things right, but the words felt inadequate. What could she say to undo what had been done? She had insulted this woman, underestimated her, and in doing so, she had lost the authority she once held. "I'm sorry," the pilot said again, this time with more sincerity, but the black woman simply nodded. She wasn't angry, but there was no denying the hurt that lingered beneath the surface. She had been forced to stand up for herself in a way she should never have had to. For a moment, it seemed like the entire cabin had come to a standstill. Everyone waited for what would happen next. But as the seconds ticked by, the black woman turned, gracefully walking back to her seat. Her posture was proud, her step steady, and she had not allowed the situation to break her. As she sat down, she glanced out of the window, her face calm once more. It was clear that the pilot had learned a valuable lesson, a lesson she would never forget. In that moment, the cabin seemed to exhale a collective breath, as if relieved that the confrontation had ended. But the impact of what had just transpired would stay with everyone aboard that flight for a long time to come. The pilot had learned, in the most humbling way possible, that assumptions could be dangerous, and that respect was something that needed to be given to everyone, no matter who they were. The plane had resumed its quiet hum as the confrontation slowly faded into the background, but the ripple effects of the moment remained. The tension that had filled the cabin now seemed to dissolve, replaced by an odd, almost reverential silence. The passengers had witnessed something important, something that transcended the immediate drama of the confrontation. They had been spectators to a lesson that could not have been taught any other way, a lesson about humility, respect, and the consequences of judging others based on appearances. The black woman sat in her seat, looking out of the window, her composure unwavering. She had not raised her voice, had not resorted to anger or aggression. Instead, she had remained calm, dignified, and strong in the face of the pilot's attempt to humiliate her. And in doing so, she had demonstrated a powerful truth, that the ability to remain unshaken in the face of disrespect is one of the strongest forms of power. She didn't need to yell or make a scene to prove her worth. Her presence alone spoke volumes, and now the entire cabin knew exactly who she was and what she stood for. The pilot, on the other hand, stood at the front of the cabin, visibly shaken. She had spent the past few moments staring at the floor, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. The weight of her mistake pressed heavily on her chest. She knew she had crossed a line, but now she was unsure how to make amends. Her authority had been stripped away, not by the woman in the seat, but by her own actions. The pilot had allowed her assumptions and prejudices to cloud her judgment, and now she was left to reckon with the consequences. It wasn't just the black woman who had the power to teach lessons. The pilot, too, had learned something invaluable that day. Her earlier arrogance and dismissive attitude had led her to a moment of profound self-realization. She could no longer cling to the idea that her position alone made her superior to others. The black woman, despite her calm demeanor, had shown her that power isn't about titles or uniforms. It's about respect, and it's earned through actions, not authority alone. As the minutes passed, the pilot walked down the aisle toward the woman's seat, her steps slower, more deliberate. She had been rehearsing what she would say, trying to find the right words to convey her regret. When she reached the black woman's seat, she stopped, standing for a moment in silence. The woman didn't look up, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in the air that the pilot was there, standing before her. Finally, the pilot spoke. I owe you an apology," she said, her voice steady but sincere. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I made assumptions about you, and I shouldn't have. I've learned something today, and I will never forget it." The black woman turned her head, her gaze meeting the pilot's. There was no anger in her eyes, only understanding. She didn't say anything at first. The apology, though genuine, felt like it could never truly undo what had happened. But the woman's presence was enough. Her dignity, her quiet strength, made it clear that she didn't need the pilot's apology to feel validated. She had known all along who she was, and no one could take that from her. With a soft nod, the black woman finally spoke. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice calm. "But this isn't about me. It's about how we treat each other. Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are or where they come from. I hope you remember that moving forward." The pilot's face softened, the weight of the lesson sinking in. "I will," she said quietly, and for the first time since this ordeal had begun, she finally felt at peace. She knew she had learned something far more important than any flight maneuver or protocol. She had learned to respect people for who they truly were, not based on preconceived notions. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but the passengers carried with them the memory of what they had witnessed. For some, it was a reminder of the dangers of making judgments based on appearances. For others, it was a lesson in the power of self-control and the quiet strength that comes with standing firm in the face of adversity. As the plane began its descent and the passengers prepared to disembark, the black woman remained seated, serene as ever. She had shown everyone on board that day what true power looked like: grace under pressure, humility in the face of disrespect, and an unwavering belief in herself and her worth. She had made a difference, not just in the pilot's life, but in the lives of every person on that plane. When the plane finally landed and the passengers began to file out, many of them paused as they walked past her seat. Some offered quiet nods of respect, while others gave her appreciative glances. She didn't seek attention or validation, but the gesture was not lost on her. The moment had ended, but its impact would last far longer than any apology or gesture of reconciliation. It was a moment in time that had changed everyone on that plane, especially the pilot. And it was a reminder that respect, once lost, is hard to regain. But it is never too late to learn.